I love this idea of like redefining courage that you mentioned a little bit about, because when you say courage or anybody says courage, my mind immediately goes to like Wizard of Oz and,
Yes.
the lion, right?
The
And,
lion. Yep.
and, and courage is like, that whole, you're not afraid, you can go do the brave thing and whatever. But what becomes really clear pretty quickly for me, at least today it did anyway, was this idea that if you're not afraid, then you don't need courage,
Right.
because you just go do the thing. Like you're not afraid of it, so you just go do it. And so courage is only necessary in those places where we are afraid, or where we are feeling vulnerable, or we are like where we need, like, okay, it's that extra boost, that extra oomph to like, okay, I gotta go do the thing, even though there's discomfort, even though there's a little bit of fear, even though, whatever it is. It feels like such a different take. Like if we had put that take on courage into the Wizard of Oz, I think it would have been a whole different story.
Right. And I think sometimes this language of, just be courageous and just fight through and all this sort of thing, it bypasses, I
It's
think, a
icky.
lot of the lived experiences.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about cultivating authenticity, then we have to recognize like that's the spectrum of our experiences, the fears, the hesitations, the doubts, all the things that we experience. I mean, the joys, the triumphs, those areas that we're really super confident about. Kind of a new definition of courage, especially in this conversation around vulnerability and authenticity, is that ability to be afraid and come against those periods of discomfort and those periods of I don't knows and those periods of, oh, this feels really uncomfortable, and then begin to move anyway. Maybe it's just a few steps, or maybe it's just kind of tipping our head and looking over, but being able to recognize those experiences, that's courage, right? And it's not avoidance of fear or avoidance of anything really. It's
Yeah.
using all those emotions as kind of a spotlight or as kind of a guidepost, pointing us in the direction and taking us further and further and further
Yeah.
into this experience of authenticity, this experience of vulnerability.
It's kind of interesting, because then courage becomes the authenticity, right? Like
Yeah, right.
the courage to say, I'm feeling vulnerable right now. And like, this is taking a lot of courage to even say this, and then to say the thing I'm about to say, like that then becomes the authenticity. I think that's
Yeah.
a lot of the things that, uh, I wasn't modeled those things growing up. I wasn't modeled adults saying out loud that, like, I'm feeling
Anything,
vulnerable
anything,
or
absolutely.
anything. Yeah, I'm saying out loud anything. Yeah. So it's just interesting to kind of, well, as we do, I think, with any of our monthly topics, like our discussion into that topic just really peels back these layers of like, yeah, I understand authenticity. I think we've talked about it, and right, we're like, oh,
Right. We get
yeah,
cocky about it,
right.
don't we? Well, and I
Yeah.
think it plays into what you're talking about, this, self-awareness. Like, to be authentic, we have to kind of know what the thing is, right? And so the more that we kind of lean into who we are in all the places, like, the places that we like to put up on the mantle and the places that we like to maybe put in the closet, and that they all represent our authentic selves, like all the voices, like in our head, right? Those voices of like, "Oh, are you sure you can do that?" Or those voices of like, "Yeah, go for it, you can do that." I mean, all of those are part of our authentic self. And this goes back to our conversation several months ago when we talked about family systems theory,
Oh, yeah.
which is this, this idea that there are all these aspects of ourselves. And so the idea is not to get rid of any of these aspects, but to make friends with them and learn how they can communicate and how they support one another. Same sort of thing, right? And this idea of authenticity, it's not to get rid of the anxious parts of ourselves or even to avoid the parts of ourselves that sometimes get sad, or all those are parts of who we are, and they're not things to be avoided. They're things to be embraced. They're things to learn from. They're things to point us in different directions. And I think authenticity, it just reminds me, the family systems theory always comes up when I think of authenticity,
Yeah.
because it's all the little parts of us, right?
Yeah.
And
Which
how
I think we've otherwise been taught to get rid of.
right,
Yeah.
right. because and it never works too, because I mean, even like, in a therapeutic sort of thing, if you're anxious and someone tells you, "Well, just don't be anxious,"
Just
or
be
so the harder
stop
you
it.
so the harder you try not to be anxious, the more anxious you become,
Yeah,
right? And so it's that fighting against what is sort of thing, and
yeah,
which is the opposite of authenticity, right? And so it's this recognition, this self-awareness like you talked about.
yeah.
It really does open the door.
So that idea that, like, I think in the past we have been told, get rid of the parts of you that society says you shouldn't be or shouldn't have.
Right.
And so we look to the world outside of us to tell us the things
Mm,
we're not supposed to be. And yet we also get this message at the same time that's like, just be your own self-reliant individual and, like, just you know, do you. And then at the same time, in our spiritual world, we have this whole, like, be you so much that you are you in a vacuum.
yeah.
And so we have this weird, like, looking outside of ourselves for certain things and then looking inside of ourselves for other things. And it almost seems like we have totally backwards which things, because I think it's not that we only look inside. It's not that we only look outside. I don't think it's either of, there's no only, I think it's both.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I think we have to learn, maybe part of self-awareness is learning which parts we look inside for and which we look outside for, because I don't think we're trying to isolate ourselves from the world. And yet, it's not that we're looking to the world to tell us how to be.
Mm,
It's learning how to look at the world as a mirror to show us how we are being. Like, the world shows up based on my thoughts and beliefs, plus a little bit.
right, right.
But my mirror does show up outside of myself. And so if I'm acting anxious and somebody shows up and just says, stop it, I think typically what we've learned is, oh, I should stop it because that's not an acceptable behavior.
Mhm.
When in reality, what's happening is, it has nothing to do with my anxiousness. It has everything to do with the fact that my anxiousness makes that other person feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And they're probably so unaware of the fact that of, like, what's actually happening, that my anxiety is making them uncomfortable. And they're like, you need to stop because how dare you make me feel something. And so that's totally backwards. Like, we could look at that situation as a mirror and be like, oh, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now. I got it. Like,
Right.
that's the moment to check in my self-awareness. What's happened? I'm feeling anxious. It's I got it. Making them uncomfortable. Like, that's, yes, good for me to understand, but not take responsibility for their experience, their feelings, and realize, like, okay, I'm being anxious in this moment and they're going through a thing. Okay, got it. Which is totally different than, oh, they told me to stop. So this isn't, I'm not an acceptable, I am not in, the mode of being accepted by humanity or whatever. Like, we're those times, we've talked about every once in a while, like, I don't feel fit for human consumption today.
Yes. I've had those days recently.
And I don't know that any of that is new.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, like, in this moment it gets pieced together in a fresh package.
Just talking about, things being a mirror for our own experience, it's really interesting, this idea of authenticity. I was just thinking as you were talking that it is this, like, relational experience, right? It is this experience that can
Yeah.
only be fully experienced, I think, in relation to something, right?
Hmm.
So if I'm by myself, authenticity really isn't a question, right? Because I'm by myself. But when I show up in
Hmm.
places or when I interact with people
Hmm.
or when I have relationships with people, whatever those relationships are. But that's where that self either gets pulled out into the bright sunny sunlight or gets like pushed down, like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, now we're
Yeah.
with people. We can't do that. So it's very interesting. We talk about so much about community and about spaces of belonging and connection and community and how we're like born for this, I think authenticity is only experienced in relationally, and so I think it
Mm,
just adds even more importance
yeah,
to building those systems, those frameworks, those places where authenticity can be cultivated, right? They're not cultivated in a vacuum. They're not
yeah,
cultivated
yeah,
by ourselves, right? It's only when we are bumped up against, other people's stuff
yeah.
too. This idea of authenticity is it, even though it is who we are, it does seem to be a group project. As much as I hate group projects, it does seem to like that's what really gives it this like fluidity and this texture, and that's where it kind of
Yeah,
gets its juice, I think,
yeah.
in relation to something.
Years ago, somebody who they were teacher, I was student, right? And they conveyed this idea that everything is just relationships. And at the time I was like, no, that doesn't make any sense. There's so much more to all this than just really. And here I am now being like, everything's just relationships. I mean, it is. I mean,
Yeah,
isn't that really the whole point of
it is.
being here
Yeah.
in a belief of oneness? If the thing, whatever the thing is one, there is no other. There's nothing else to mirror, to show, to demonstrate, to experience what the oneness is. It's just oneness, which I think is a challenging concept to really wrap our minds around, but I think we can kind of start to get there, right?
At least in the general direction.
But then that means the existence of at least the appearance, like let's not pretend I actually know anything, the at least the appearance of more than one, I would think would then be so that life could experience itself.
Mm,
There would have to be at least two, and in fact there's like trillions and I don't know, zillions, whatever. Like there's so many aspects of life, like from the cells, the molecules, the whatever, to the people and rocks and animals and planets, galaxies, whatever. Like there's so many expressions of existence so that life can know itself. I mean, that like, isn't that the whole? Yeah, right.
that's like oh,
But isn't that
my
the?
brain just cracked a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah, wow.
but isn't that what all of it's here for? Is so life can know itself in as a rock. But it
Right.
would have to be like rock and something, rock and dirt, rock and volcano, rock and I don't know, whatever, right? Like
Paper
whatever the
paper, scissors.
rock, paper, scissors. Yeah, right. But yeah, I mean, I really like it feels like that's got to be it.
Yeah.
Like life is here. The existence of form and people and material objects and the whole thing is for life to know itself. So we have at least we have the experience of the appearance of more than one. You know,
Mm,
like where we are, I don't know, wired in a way to look at life so that we can see the other things, the other pieces, and then try and not other the things,
right.
right? So it is an interesting thing, but yeah, I think it's that whole mirroring thing. Like we are in relationship intentionally. We are here in relationship to know life. There wouldn't be life without it.
I know, I mean, I don't even know what to say now. It is this process, this experiencing, this, like you talk about this, self-awareness, and then it's this, idea of in that self-awareness coming up against those spaces of discomfort, and being willing to kind of sit in that discomfort maybe a minute longer than we thought we could,
Yeah,
and then that opens the door to more and more, so that I mean, I think that's kinda how self-awareness and growth and spiritual journey goes, right?
yeah,
And I don't know that there's ever an end. I don't think that we ever go like, "Oh, yep, found it. There we are."
yeah,
Right? Because we're ever changing, ever moving, ever transforming, ever evolving. So, like, every day is a new opportunity to cultivate authenticity in this day. The journey is never over.
well, thank you for joining us on this, at least the beginning of our journey into cultivating authenticity. And as usual, I'm loving this conversation about the self-awareness, the discovery of self-awareness, and then cultivating courage, these beginning steps to cultivating authenticity, or maybe recultivating authenticity, looking at it again. I think we're going to go into some amazing places this month, and I think we'll have some amazing discoveries. So if you're looking for more of a conversation like this, you can check out our Thursday night event, The Gathering, which we are rebranding. It's pretty much going to be the same, but we're giving it a new graphic upgrade and a little bit of more stuff to it. Anyway, check it out on the website, soulevolutioncollaborative.org, and poke around while you're there. There's plenty of stuff there for you. And so once again, we're grateful for you to be here and watch and participate with us. We would love to hear from you. How are you cultivating authenticity this month? So thanks again, and we will see you either Thursday or next week.